certainly benefited from it in this excellent historical current perspective on inclusive growth. I think Pakistan's current episode of low economic growth with high double-digit inflation will be completing its 5th year in June 2012. For an economy which is well known for its resilience and bouncing back after frequent downturns, its reputation is bearing the same. The current emphasis in the economic policy debates on the breaking out of this stagflation, as indeed is the theme of this conference, is therefore very understandable and needs to be lauded. And the government too is at least turning its attention to this issue, even if we may agree or not agree with the new growth framework. What has especially pleased me about this conference is that while examining the issues of growth revival, it has also focused attention on the impact of the slowdown on how it has affected people's lives, that is, its employment and labour market impact, and through it on living standards and poverty. This, to my mind, is a welcome change. For in examining issues in just macro terms, one tends to overlook the complex nature of the Pakistan economy, and especially when just analyzing issue in these terms may hide forces at work that would override or even come up with the contrary results that one would expect to find just looking at the macroeconomic performance. I have repeatedly said that the working and understanding of the economic dynamics of Pakistan is not easy, and therefore I will try to show today how the effects of the macroeconomy as presenting in stagflation and how the economists saw its labour market impact and poverty puzzle has turned out to be, at least on some of the evidence emerging, showing that it may not be what many economists, including myself, predicted what is happening, and there are forces at work in the Pakistan economy which we need to understand. That is to say, what Professor Ashwini said, between Pakistan 1 and Pakistan 2, you might find that Pakistan 2 is now playing the 20-year-old game much better than Pakistan 1 is. But let me try to go ahead and show how this is going to happen. Okay, starting with the objective, as I said very frankly, that is study forms part of a major research initiative by the Pakistan Institute to understand the macroeconomic dynamics. The first is, of course, breaking out of stagflation, which I mentioned is a critical thing in today's conference. But especially this particular presentation, which I say is preliminary and is up for discussion, analyzes the impact of the current stagflation on unemployment, real wage rates, and poverty. Well, this is the macroeconomic performance over the last 20 years with the classic boom-bust cycles, and which have already been discussed, the high growth with low inflation and the moderate growth with high to moderate and high growth with low inflation, and now this period of stagflation. I'm actually looking at this particular period post really 2006-07, which we have been looking at. Stagflation is classically defined as a period of very high inflation, and as I agree with, but I think historically the Pakistan inflation rate is somewhere being about 8%, so this is above that particular ratio. And the growth rate on the average in Pakistan has been between 5 to 5.5%. And in these years, as you can say, the growth level is between 2 to 3%. And in this year, I think thanks to the effort of the Federal Bureau of Statistics governing body, we have managed to increase the growth rate from 3.2 to 3.8 by readjusting or not adjusting what we should have possibly adjusted, but still, it doesn't quite make us break out of stagflation at the moment. Now, my presentation is in 4 parts. There's a brief review of studies projecting, analyzing the impact of the current stagflation on unemployment and poverty. Secondly, I look at what actually happened, a review of movement of key variables, unemployment, real wages, and poverty. And finally, a preliminary analysis of why the labour market poverty impact may be less than projected in earlier studies, especially in rural area. And this part is really where I am coming to in terms of the Pakistan 2 and what has been happening there may lie some of the answers to some of the puzzles we are finding. I start by saying that what did we, the economists, say about our projections on the impact of the economic slowdown and inflation on labour market and poverty. And since I was the one who last year said that in all probability it led to increases in poverty and unemployment, I say, you who has not sinned throw the first stone. But I do go across to see what everybody said regarding what will happen on the economic slowdown and inflation on different things. The first was in which again I was a member with Dr. Naved Hamad, a very eminent, it was the panel of economists, the preliminary report called Economic Stabilization with a Human Face, which came out in 2008, which said yes, stabilization is essential. But I'm so glad that Dr. Irfan is raising a fundamental issue. What have we learned from that stabilization process? And I think we went wrong in a number of ways, and rethinking it now is absolutely vital with foresight of what has happened before us. I don't want to go into detail, but the results were very clear. First, that unemployment because of the shock would increase by 3% over 2008-9 and 2009-10. Increasing the unemployment rate by over 1/3. So you would go from something like 5 to 8% growth rate in unemployment, and poverty would increase by 3.5% in 2007-8 due to explosion, then 2.7 and 2%, so that you would have, depending on which way you started, you would go from something like, if you took the 2004-5 figure of about 25%, you would be ending up around between 30 to 35% by 2009-10. The second one is the Institute of Public Policy, Beacon House National University, and its first annual report, The State of the Economy, and these estimates are based on the use of Sajjad and Munir model, which I will discuss later. And what it does is it argues fundamentally that even if we start headcount ratio, which you see in this particular thing, the World Bank estimate, as I said, depending on, there were two estimates for 2004-5, whether you take 29 or 25, and subsequently the rates which the World Bank come up with were 25 and 17. But in the IPP model, as you see, the headcount ratio increases from something like 30, it comes down to about 28, and then increases to 43% is the impact of food inflation alone. So this is how they worked out. And the number of poor millions goes up from 40 million to 79 million, and that is the figure which the IPP has been talking about, at 50% living below the poverty line. The third figure, again, you see, all was looking at what is happening to food poverty and inflation in developing Asia. Is poverty reduction coming to an end? And here too, if you look at the Asian Development Bank, it was saying that if food inflation goes up by 10%, 7 million people would be thrown into poverty. So you would find something like 3 to 4% increase in poverty if food inflation increased by 10 and then 20 and then 30. So you had again 21 million people falling below the increase in poverty, the numbers below the poverty line. And this would have thrown you up to about 26, 27%. I now come to the World Bank, and this was a controversial figure. The World Bank had come up with a figure for 2007-8, a figure which they said had shown that poverty had continued to decline from the figure which I mentioned, 25% in 2004-5 to 22% in 2005-6, and they had said that during 2007-8, poverty had come down to 17.2%. And they argued that because of various factors, the economy had managed to continue the momentum of lowering growth despite what was happening. But they were very importantly said to cover that when they made this presentation at the Planning Commission, that in terms of the scenario which they were saying, you see what they said was that if you look at it, this is the
the GDP growth rate, which was going up and coming down like this. This is the projected growth rate then in 2008 to 2010-11. And they said, yes, poverty has come down to this figure of 17%, but poverty will then increase, and by the end of the period, let's say the period now, poverty would be somewhere between 25 to 27%, and this was the growth rate. And they actually also showed that the impact of food inflation, the impact of food inflation on poverty would be what you see here, that as the food inflation started hitting in, even in the quarters of 2007-8, the decline which was taking place began to get reversed, and that is why you got the average of 17%. And I may also mention here, which is now a recent global estimates on poverty estimates, which is main poverty line is $1.25 a day, and the World Bank estimates of consumption poverty as showing that despite the global economic crisis and other shocks, preliminary estimates for 2010 indicate that poverty continued to fall as the first MDG goal they say was met, and the preliminary estimates of extreme poverty are based on a smaller sample of countries, but at least seems to be not just, as I will say, something happening in Pakistan, but also at least seems to be suggested from the global estimates. Now, before I go on, I want to make it very clear what we are talking about. Because unless we understand what we are talking about, we can get into lots of problems about what the actual outcomes are. And I say that, how do you project employment? How did the panel of economists project employment, or how other people employment, or how we used to do it? Basically, you use the concept of employment elasticity. That is the change in employment divided by the change in GDP or output. So, and then you projected growth of the labor force and projected growth rate. So exactly, if we took the employment elasticity, the panel took it at 0.45. So you take it, let's say 5%. If you're growing at 0.5 is the elasticity. If you're growing at, let's say, only 4%, then the growth rate of your employment is 2%, and the growth rate of the labor force is 3% or 3.5%, then you get an unemployment rate of 1.5%. But what can happen is that the projected unemployment, if you will think that the projected unemployment is going to increase from 5 to 8%, let's say as the panel said, it's quite possible that because there is no safety net, there is no social protection, many people opt for low income productivity jobs and remain unemployed. That is, the post-employment elasticity will increase. I therefore believe that you have to be very careful in making employment projections. The second is, therefore, I believe that the concept of real wages is a better labor market indicator, suffering from limitations that it does, but this gives you some idea of what is happening in the labor market. The second thing which I want to, and I think this is very important, poverty estimates are extremely sensitive to the choice of the poverty line, as there is considerable bundling of household people just below and above. And as the earlier ADB said, he said that if, for example, to change the poverty line by 20% and reduce the poverty line, the percentage in Pakistan poor dropped from 25 to 12.8%. Secondly, Pakistan's national poverty line was established by the Planning Commission in 98, 99. I'm not sure whether that was done under Dr. Shahid Amjad, but just before that. And then this is adjusted by the CPI. What is most important to keep in mind is that the national poverty line for Pakistan means extreme poverty. That is, it is around, actually it comes to slightly higher, 58, but I'm just using this figure, 55 rupees per person per day in 2009-10 at or 1,700. So a family of 6 which earns more than 11,000 rupees is not considered to be poor. And our poverty line therefore changes in the sense that it's not poverty line, but the numbers, you must keep this in mind for what is happening. Now let us look what actually has happened, or what the data suggests has happened. And first of all, let's look at the figures for labor market during stagflation. So as I have said, you find your this is, I think, the growth rate, it's plummeting down. But if you look at the real wages in the economy, or if you look at the real wages, let us say, of agricultural workers, then the real wages of agricultural workers have actually begun to increase. And if you look at the real wages of construction workers, I think that's the one, are beginning to decline. So unemployment levels have increased from something like 5%. The unemployment levels are going up from something like 5% to something like 6%. But real wages are increasing in two of the sectors. Let me repeat here. The real wages in agriculture, real wages in services are showing an increase. Real wages in construction, I have not shown it, but we've also recently worked out real wages in manufacturing are coming down. So something is happening in the economy, in the labor market, which shows a dualism, which I will come to later. Now to the poverty estimates. Now, as I said, the Pakistan PSLM Household Income Expenditure Survey the results are being analyzed or have been analyzed, 2010-11. Now, the unofficial estimates reported in the press that poverty levels declined from 17.2% in 2007. And it's very ironic that my good friend, fellow economist Ashfaq Hasan Khan, who said that when he made this big fight for the 17%, now has argued that how the hell have they got this figure? And he said that they have come up with a figure of 12.5%. So poverty has declined in this period from 17.5 to 12.5, which I think is something which really one needs to think about. But let me say that in PIDE we have a panel data, which is not the same as having a complete national data. Our figures show that as far as rural poverty is concerned, rural poverty has increased but only marginally from 24% to 27% between 2004 and 10 for rural Punjab and Sindh only. And we don't have figures for the thing, but rural all provinces was 22.4%. Now, basically the point or the puzzle which I am posing is what has happened if, and let me also make it clear what I am examining. Let's be very clear on that. I am examining, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it. I am examining what is happening to labor market in terms of unemployment, in terms of real wages, and what I am arguing in terms of the poverty line is 55 to 57 rupees a day. You may say it's too low, you may say it's not right, you may say look at malnutrition, may look at food security, may look at anything. My point is, I am consistently looking just at one factor, not in the broader question of inclusive growth or of opportunities. Now, if you look at the period, Amjad and Kamal 1997, we looked at the period for 63-64. What are the major factors explaining changes? And we shared that it is real per capita income GNP and remittances per capita and real wages was significant in explaining what was happening to poverty. And I think what is very important, and this is what I am bringing into the debate, is that remittances are a factor which have not been discussed as much as they should be in the macro issues which we are looking at. Secondly, is a study by Akhtar Sajjad and Mansoor, who really extend Amjad and Kamal 1997, and they also find that 5% increase in real per capita income. So this is the per capita income is the significant one and the highest correlation coefficient, as well as the elasticity coefficient. But remittances are important, although the coefficient is less. But they looked at food prices. When we looked at it, we didn't find it that significant, but they find food prices significant, which I think is true. They looked at human capital interest and the fall in unemployment. Again, Amjad 2009 looks at the impact of poverty, and it makes a critical who sends the remittance, who sends it where, and Rehana Siddiqui or Rizwana also looks at and find that this is significant. So, there are some key variables which influence poverty, and if you look at the Pakistan case, what you're finding is, look at economic growth and per capita growth. Now, we must keep in mind that economic growth is low, but it's not negative. And the per capita income on average has shown it will increase. The second is that food inflation has gone over 70%. Just taking food inflation by itself, as the World Bank said, will increase poverty by 15%. And then real wages have showed an increase in agriculture and services, but decline in construction, and as we have seen now, in manufacturing. Remittances have increased from just over $1 billion in financial year 2001 to $13 billion. And the PID IGC studies, we estimate that total remittances under some sort of strong assumptions could be as high as 20 billion, and the Pakistan diaspora we estimate is around 8 billion. The human capital index has improved, and unemployment, of course, has gone, which I had said earlier, has increased, but it's gone up from 5 to 6%. Now I come to the question, can we go back one? Sorry, I'm going, yeah, this one. Now I say the question, what could be happening in the economy? But is it the usual word? I think the word everybody is using now is Pakistan is a resilient economy. It's a dual or a two-speed economy. Let's say if this, which is the economy 1 and economy 2, as Professor Ashwini Sage says, look at the positives. Rural economy, over 60% of the population. Our friend Professor Zaidi said it could be even just 50, but there were 2 or 3. What are the positives which are happening in the rural area? There was a terms of trade stimulus which increased in procurement price of wheat from 450 to 950, the biggest jump in the history, or not just of Pakistan, but even if you look at the last 500 years, this is the biggest jump in wheat prices. Increase, and not only did there was an increase in remittances, but if you look at these household incomes, there was a shift in remittances from urban to rural areas. We think real wages of agricultural workers, as we have worked out, have increased, and growth in wage employment in non-farm sector, livestock, rural industries have increased. Growth in rural demand of consumer durables. Benazir income support program has not been evaluated, but can be thrown into it. The negatives, of course, are that the small farmers and landless labor, 1/3 of agricultural labor, net buyers of food grain, there has not been any net increase in agriculture productivity, and increase in consumer durables may represent small, middle and large farmers than the poor people. The urban economy, I think the negatives are more than the positives. The energy crisis, crippled growth of large, medium and small scale, real wages of workers in manufacturing and construction, global recession impacted urban more than rural economy. But even within the urban economy, I agree with Professor Zaidi that we need to look more into and I say there's a growth in services, and formal real wages and services increased, and other particular programs. So what are my conclusions? The overwhelming expected negative impact of low growth, high double-digit inflation, and crippling energy shortage on the labor market and poverty were to some extent cushioned by a very large increase in remittances by the Pakistan diaspora, improved terms of trade for agriculture, and possibly BISP and other support programs. That said, the fact that even today, whichever figure we take, even if we take, let's say 15%, 20 to 30 million people living in absolute poverty, rupees 55 a day, is deplorable. And with around 3.5 million openly unemployed, shows that unemployment and poverty need to be addressed urgently. Thirdly, I would say the poverty line in Pakistan determined in 1999-2000 needs to be re-estimated to reflect changes in consumption patterns and income levels of the population. You know, if you work it out from the point of view of US dollar 125, which the World Bank uses, it comes to only about 40 rupees, because that's how it is calculated with real things. Secondly, and last, I think, let us share the results. Let us not share the results, but let's share the data, the PSLM, with everybody who is interested. Let them look at it, let them critically evaluate it. At least on the BID side, we will make the PPHS 2010 panel to data, and as a good economist, I don't give any timeline, I say shortly. Need to analyze labor market and poverty issues, and this is the important one. Need to analyze labor market and poverty issues, taking into account the dynamics and structural changes in the Pakistan economy. with an open mind rather than preconceived fixed positions. Thank you very much.